Welcome back to The Explainer. Today, we are cracking open an ancient text that holds, honestly, one of the most fascinating and incredibly specific geographic puzzles in all of recorded history. We're talking about the Book of Zechariah. Now, I know it's super easy to write off a 2,500-year-old manuscript as just some dusty historical relic, right? But for textual detectives and scholars, this book, it's actually a highly complex, brilliantly structured blueprint. It's packed with details that are so utterly precise, so amazingly literal, and deeply interwoven with later texts that they constantly fly right under the radar of a casual reader. It is literally staggering to think that a puzzle pieced together 2.5 millennia ago is still intensely debated by historians and theologians to this very day. So, let's put on our detective hats. We're going to examine the source material, decode the geography, and see exactly how this ancient puzzle fits together.
Okay, let's dive right into this mystery. How on earth could a text written in the middle of a completely ruined post-exilic Jerusalem around 520 BC perfectly map onto the geography and theology of the New Testament? To really feel the weight of this, you've got to picture the scene. The Jewish people had just gotten back from a devastating exile in Babylon. Jerusalem wasn't some thriving, bustling metropolis. It was practically rubble. The incredible glory of Solomon's temple, destroyed for decades. The people are living surrounded by massive political instability and economic despair. And yet, smack in the middle of this total desolation, a prophet named Zechariah stands in the ruins and starts receiving these visions that just entirely bypass his bleak reality. Instead, he projects centuries, maybe even millennia, into a highly specific future. To wrap our heads around this, we have to look at the massive time gaps this single book covers. It bridges ancient history with unfulfilled expectations. We start the timeline at 520 BC with Zechariah. Then, the text asks us to take a massive leap, over 500 years forward to roughly 33 AD, hitting the New Testament era with the crucifixion and ascension. And then, it points toward a completely unknown future date for a prophesied return. The real kicker with reading ancient visionary texts is that they rarely hand you a neat little calendar date. They stretch across millennia, totally ignoring human lifespans. That forces us to look for thematic and geographic anchors instead of just checking a clock. To make sense of this timeline, scholars lean on this really fascinating concept called the two horizons. See, ancient prophets didn't have our luxury of hindsight. When they peered into the distant future, they saw far-off events compressed together into a single vision. Think of it like this. Imagine you're standing on a vast plain, looking way out at a towering mountain range. From where you're standing, two huge mountain peaks might look like they are right next to each other. They might even look like the exact same mountain. But as you travel closer, that optical illusion fades, and you realize, wow, there is actually a massive, sprawling valley of thousands of years separating those two peaks. Zechariah is looking at two distinct horizons, a first coming and a final return, and he is experiencing them and writing them down as one blended reality. And this two horizons effect? It creates some profound emotional whiplash right there in the text. In chapter 9, Zechariah describes a king arriving in Jerusalem, but he doesn't ride in on a war horse with a massive conquering army. No, he arrives in absolute humility, riding on a donkey, speaking of profound peace. But then, fast forward just a few chapters to Zechariah 12, and the tone violently shifts. Suddenly, we are looking at a figure whom the nations have pierced. And this figure is mourned globally, with the exact same intensity as someone mourning a firstborn son. Zechariah completely entangles this quiet, humble arrival with a cosmic, earth-shattering event of mourning and divine intervention. Section 1. The hidden geographic clue.
Now, Zechariah is pretty famous for his complex, sometimes downright bizarre poetic symbolism. But here in chapter 14, he just suddenly drops the metaphors. He completely abandons the poetry and gives us this surprisingly precise, almost cartographic map of a future event. The text explicitly names a tangible location you could go and visit today, the Mount of Olives, sitting just east of the old city of Jerusalem. Zechariah claims that in a final, climactic day, divine feet will physically touch down on this exact geographic coordinate. And it doesn't stop there. The text states the mountain itself will physically split in half from east to west, carving out a massive new geological valley. He isn't talking about some spiritual, metaphorical mountain here. He's giving us ancient GPS coordinates.
For textual detectives, this is where the puzzle gets incredibly thrilling. How does this connect 500 years later to the Book of Acts? Well, in Acts chapter 1, Jesus ascends into the sky. And where exactly does this happen? The text makes a point to note it is the Mount of Olives. In that exact moment, angels appear and state he will return in the exact same visible physical manner in which he departed. When you put these two texts side by side, you see the identical geographic anchor. The very spot Zechariah predicted for this grand earth-splitting return is the exact spot the New Testament claims as the departure point. You could literally pull up Google Earth right now, drop a pin on the Mount of Olives, and you'd be staring at the precise focal point of a 2,500-year-old prophetic mystery.
Section 2. Echoes in the New Testament.
Let's see how this builds into what scholars call a chain reaction of biblical prophecy across multiple authors and eras. Because as it turns out, this geographic clue is not the only thread tying these texts together. To theologians, this is a prime example of the organic unity of revelation. This is the staggering idea that even though these texts were written by dozens of different authors, separated by completely different eras, spanning vastly different cultures and ancient languages, they still form one massive, flawlessly interconnected puzzle. When you study the sources carefully, you realize the New Testament writers weren't just inventing new ideas out of thin air. They were constantly reaching back and utilizing Zechariah's ancient blueprint.
In fact, Zechariah's ancient text laid the precise groundwork for all of these major themes that would later absolutely dominate the writings of Paul, John, and Matthew. First, you have the escort of saints. Zechariah mentions the Lord returning with all the holy ones, perfectly setting up the Apostle Paul's later writings to the Thessalonians, as well as the heavenly armies we see in Revelation. Then there's the unique day of the Lord, a total disruption of natural time. We also see the living waters flowing from Jerusalem to heal the world. And finally, the pierced shepherd, an innocent figure struck down. This ancient source provided the exact theological vocabulary for the entire New Testament.
Notice how this specific detail about the unique day perfectly aligns. Zechariah describes a time coming, a day that exists completely outside of our natural cycles of light and dark. He specifically writes that it is a day, quote, known only to the Lord. Now just pause and think about how that directly mirrors Jesus' own famous words in the Gospel of Matthew. When he's speaking to his disciples about the end of the age, Jesus emphatically states that no one knows the day or hour, but only the Father. The conceptual seed for this ultimate mystery of timing, it was planted 2.5 millennia ago, and the connections get even more direct and honestly deeply emotional. Picture the immense tension on the night before the crucifixion. The atmosphere is just heavy with fear, betrayal is imminent, and the impending arrest is quite literally moments away in the darkness. Facing this terrifying reality, Jesus explicitly quotes this exact verse from Zechariah 13. By uttering the words, "Strike the shepherd and the sheep will be scattered," he was consciously demonstrating that he understood his own suffering and the terrified flight of his closest friends, not as some tragic accident, but as the fulfillment of this very prophetic blueprint. Moving from the tragedy of the shepherd to the ultimate hope found in the text, we see the exact same motif of living waters bringing global healing. Zechariah envisions a grand day when life-giving waters will flow out from Jerusalem toward both the eastern and western seas, completely restoring the barren land. If you flip to the very end of the Bible, the final chapters of the Book of Revelation describe a nearly identical river of the water of life flowing from the divine throne, flanked by trees whose leaves literally exist to heal the nations. From the ancient visions of Zechariah all the way to the final pages written by the Apostle John, the architectural blueprint of the story remains perfectly, astonishingly intact.
Section 3. The final unified kingdom.
But according to the source text, this ultimate resolution, this bringing of life and living waters, it doesn't happen in a peaceful vacuum. It actually occurs amidst a massive, terrifying geopolitical crisis centered right on Jerusalem. The text states that a final battle will encompass the city. Zechariah writes that all nations will be gathered to fight against Jerusalem, the city will be captured, and houses will be ransacked. It paints this picture of ultimate, suffocating human despair, right before a massive divine intervention completely changes the world order. It's a really stark reminder that in these ancient texts, the transition to a global kingdom is violently born out of intense, localized conflict. Out of that intense conflict, we arrive at this culminating, authoritative statement. The text says, "The Lord will be king over the whole earth. On that day, there will be one Lord, and his name the only name." This verse represents an absolute unity of power. One king, one name. It's the logical conclusion to the entire biblical narrative. It moves away from divided nations, fractured kingdoms, and endless earthly politics to an undisputed singular global authority. This deeply echoes the Apostle Paul's later writings in Philippians, where he states that ultimately every knee will bow and every tongue confess this singular authority.
Section 4. The Great Debate. Literal versus symbolic.
As we look at these interconnected clues, we have to objectively note that traditions are deeply divided on how to actually read them.
When a text is this incredibly specific, it forces the reader to make a monumental interpretive choice. On one side of the debate, many maintain this will be a literal geological event. They point to the precise GPS coordinates and argue that in the future, a physical earthquake will literally alter Jerusalem's topography, physically splitting the Mount of Olives as a tangible geographic sign of the end times. On the other side, many interpret it as a profound metaphor. They argue that prophetic literature historically uses extreme physical imagery to describe spiritual realities. In this view, splitting the mountain represents God entirely removing the massive, insurmountable barriers to human salvation. Both of these interpretations have been rigorously defended and debated by scholars for centuries, with each side recognizing the immense weight of the text. We aren't here to pick sides, but it's fascinating to see how the exact same text drives such different, profound conclusions.
I'll leave you with this to ponder. When an ancient text from 520 BC is this cartographically precise and perfectly aligns with texts written hundreds of years later, do we read it as a literal physical map of the future, or is it the ultimate spiritual metaphor? Whatever lens you view it through, the sheer structural brilliance and interconnectedness of Zechariah's prophetic puzzle remains an absolute marvel of ancient literature. Thanks so much for joining me on this explainer, and keep questioning the details.